Welcome in the Quest Number 9 podcast. My name is Seth Warner, and on this podcast, we talk about Kentucky basketball from a fan's perspective. And on this episode, we're going to be talking about Big Blue Madness and our takeaways from that. And that wrapped up on Saturday, and just our overall takeaways. Also, the new AP poll, preseason AP poll came out. So that came out with their first official rankings a couple days ago. Looking at those, just our overall takeaways, just a couple different rankings, and just my opinion on those, just where I see Kentucky falling out and some of the top teams in the country. This was one of the first times it was a Saturday night in my memory. They had a event before called BBN United before the event, and I watched a couple of videos about that. I wasn't there, but it looked really cool. They had all the players, coaches. That was really cool, and I thought they did a really good job of translating that to Big Blue Madness, where we had a John Wall appearance with Mark Pope. They both got elevated up behind the stage, so I thought that was really cool. When it came to the events, they had just a quick 5 minute scrimmage. They had a quick 5 minute scrimmage that just wrapped up real fast. It went by fast. They went up and picked a couple fans from the crowd to be coaches, so I thought that was cool. But overall, that just went by fast. Then they had a 3 point competition, a dunk contest. Cam Williams struggled for a guy that we have high expectations for his shooting ability, struggled in 3 point contests, didn't make it out of the first round. There were 2 rounds for the 3 point competition. Also, Elovich shot the ball really well. He shot the ball really well, having several racks where he didn't miss one and was one of the better shooters there. Him and obviously Trent Noah. Trent Noah ended the event with a 30 ball to win the championship. So he did. And then the dunk contest was pretty good, really confident coming into it. A couple of tens early on from Modi Abate, and Colin Chandler was able to put it away with a free throw line, one step inside the free throw line dunk lob off of a John Wall lob with his first appearance since 2009 Big Blue Madness. So it was cool to have him around for the first time, really, in my memory. And there were a lot of guys there. Probably the biggest one, Caleb Holt, was one of the big recruits there. He was there on an unofficial visit. There were a bunch of guys there, some 2027, 2028 guys there, but he was the main target there. Rippey Jr., a guy that we talked about, Duron Rippey Jr., guy that we talked about, was also in attendance. Or he wasn't in attendance there, but he was there for Pro Day. He wasn't there for Big Blue Madness. He was there for Pro Day and a bunch of other things. He was there during the week. So it was very interesting to see coming out of that visit. We talked to Jacob Polachek about that. It was a very good time for him to come around, really be able to see Pro Day. And the next big thing on Kentucky's calendar is blue-white scrimmage coming up on Saturday. No, coming up on Friday. Yeah, coming up on Friday. So that's going to be interesting to see. That's going to be on the SEC Plus, ESPN Plus. So it'll be interesting to actually see a full 5-on-5 live scrimmage from this team and really be able to see how this team matches up to each other and really see the competitive nature that we got from these coaches talking about and being able to see it with our own eyes. Kind of moving into what I talked about a minute ago, that Ken Palm and the AP poll came out with their rankings. I'm going to first talk about the AP poll. AP poll, 35 votes, or there were 4 teams that got votes to be number one. It was Purdue with 35, Houston with 16, Florida with 8, UConn with 2. And then I'll finish out the top 10 with St. John's at 5, Duke at 6, Michigan at 7, BYU at 8, Kentucky at 9, and then Texas Tech at 10. I think overall they did a good job of having pretty much all the teams that I feel like are legit top 10 teams and are probably going to make up all in there. I think they should move a couple things around, but I'll talk about that in a minute. A couple teams that I think will be knocking on the door, top 10 early on the season, like a Louisville at number 11. They're just right outside. I think Arkansas, their guards have high upside with a pretty good surrounding cast. They're at 14. I think they could potentially knock at the door. Those are the main teams. Auburn could have, without Bruce Pearl, that probably knocked them down a little bit. A Gonzaga team at 21, who, when we look at it later, Ken Palm was a big fan of. For Ken Palm is a more analytics based. It's not a voting process. He has certain analytics, and that projects his rankings. And I'm going to talk about kind of my opinion on these rankings. I would also probably go Purdue or Houston's 1A, 1B. I would probably go Purdue, just the more solidified number one option with Braden Smith, probably the best player in the country or one of the best players, where Houston, I don't know who's going to be the number one option, but they're really solid all the way across the board with really good five-star talent and just overall really solid team. We got Florida at 3. I would have Florida just a touch more down overall. I would probably have UConn in that 3 spot, a UConn team that I feel like is really balanced and coming off that tough season. I feel like defensively with a Georgia transfer point guard who, as Kentucky teams probably notice, he's a really physical guard who can just do a lot of different things. Silas Demir, a guy that we talked about in this offseason, Kentucky was also in contest for him. He's going to be UConn's starting point guard. And with Alex Karaban also coming back, I think Alex Karaban will play really well as more of a complementary piece this year. So I really like what they're building in this UConn team as a top 3 team in the country. And then I would have probably another Big East team there in St. John's. This is where it gets really more complicated for me. The UConn pick, I feel pretty strong about, but the St. John's is where I think there's a bunch of teams that are kind of together when it comes to the top 10. But I would probably go St. John's for right now going into the season. A St. John team that has one former Kentucky player that was under John Calipari, Bryce Hopkins, 6'7" forward, who is a really physical player, was really good at Providence. When Kentucky played them, he's a guy that could be one of these number one options, legit offensive player, really good rebounder, more of a small ball 4 who is really just impactful on this team, and I think will really allow to upgrade the floor of this St. John's team with his offensive capabilities. And also Ian Jackson, another really explosive offensive player. He's going to be playing kind of a combo guard. The one question about this St. John's team is the point guard position. Ian Jackson is going to be really important. And I feel like this St. John's team, just coming off the really good season that they had last year and the defensive infrastructure that Coach Pitino is going to bring, I think is really going to allow this team with some really good offensive pieces enhance and be a top 4 team in the country. And then coming in, I would have Kentucky at number 5. Right now, I think Kentucky has a couple more question marks than those top 4 teams. Kentucky and St. John's, and then UConn, I would kind of put in the same tier. I would have those UConn probably my 1, and then St. John's and Kentucky are really close. Especially with St. John's point guard play, it's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out. With Kentucky, I feel really confident in Jalen Lowe. It will just be interesting to see how this whole thing plays out. But I feel like Kentucky has just as high upside as any of the teams in the top 4. But like I said, they are probably the most question marks going into this season early on, with Jaden Quaintance having injury issues, Otega Oweh having some injury issues, and Jalen Lowe being new and having several new faces, and how this team's going to fit together with some shooting concerns with a traditional offensive identity under Coach Pope. But they're still a top 5 team by rankings. And really, 1 through 5, there's really not, to me, a whole big difference. If there's a couple guys for any of these 5 to 6 to 8 teams, if one of the really big guys hit, these teams could be elite. If Ian Jackson becomes a stud point guard, combo guard, I really think St. John's could be elite. Just that defensive infrastructure I really trust under Coach Pitino. At number 6, I'd be moving things around a little bit more with Michigan at 6. I like what they did with some of this Michigan roster. They grabbed one of the players that Kentucky really was in heavy pursuit of, and a guy that I had talked about quite a bit on the show, Axel Lindenberg, a potential preseason first-team All-American. The transfer coming in from UAB was one of the better was the best probably non-Power 5 player last year. And coming in, averaging almost 18 points and 11 rebounds as a guy that was a late bloomer who could have been a first-round pick if he entered the NBA draft, and a guy that I really like his passing ability and overall feel going into a Michigan offense that had 2 really skilled big men last year, and his ability to really amplify himself, I feel like, in this Michigan offense with his length, athleticism, and elite defensive versatility. And Elliot Cadeau is another key guy for this Michigan team, a guy that had a very up-and-down career at North Carolina before transferring. If he hits, I really feel like the ceiling of this Michigan team, but I also think he has a really high floor. He has a really high floor that he'd be a really good playmaker, decision maker, and a guy that will create for others, not be the best defensively, and be an okay shooter. Making a big jump of shooting almost 34% from 3 last year, compared to only 19% his freshman year at UNC. And I think a guy that could be a really stable point guard at a minimum, but a guy that was a former 5-star recruit coming out of high school. And then at number 7, I would probably put Florida. This Florida team is very talented, with having several high upside pieces, with losing their 2 top scorers. On this Florida team, I'm interested to see how the progression goes with Boogie Fland and several of a guy that was very solid for a okay Arkansas team, but statistically, sometimes defensively also was a guy that really struggled, and a guy that some people saw that when he was on the floor, they weren't that good, but I really think that this team has a top 10 floor with their 2 really good big guys in Alex Karaband, Thomas Huff, another junior, averaged almost 10 points per game last year with 6 boards and 2 assists. I think they allow this team to have a really high floor. It'll be interesting to see how Boogie Fland, another transfer guard, Xavier Lee, their games transfer from different places and different levels, where Xavier Lee played in the Ivy League. Physicality, athleticism are going to be really interesting to see with this Florida Gators team, how he translates over. And perimeter defense is always going to be very important for this Florida team, losing their 2 best perimeter defenders last year, one transferring to Kentucky and one going to the NBA and graduating. So this Florida team fits in at my another 8 spot. It's down 5 spots compared to the AP poll. I feel like anywhere from 3 to 8 are, I think, really similar to me. Just all these teams have guys that if they hit their upsides or they figure out the perimeter defensive issues. With Florida, I think that's going to be really good. Like Xavier Lee defensively, coming from the Ivy League, I don't know how he's going to do on the perimeter defending. And that's going to be very important for this Florida team. And that could expose their bigs on the backside, trying to balance having elite offense with guards who struggle defensively. At number 9, this is where I put BYU. BYU, AJ DeBance, Richie Saunders was one of the breakout players last year in the Big 12, averaging 16 points, 4 rebounds, and almost 2 assists a game. A guy that actually took a visit to Kentucky and would have most likely committed to Kentucky if he did not have family ties back in BYU with his grandmother and some of his family that he wanted to stay there for. Robert Wright is another big-time player for BYU, another transfer from Baylor. The Baylor guard is going into his sophomore season, played with Cooper Flagg and all of them in college or in high school, where he was one of the 5-star recruits coming out of high school, really talented player who had a solid season last year at Baylor, averaging 11 points and 4 assists. A guy who could take a potential elite sophomore jump, could be one of the best guards in the country with his elite upside as a dynamic athlete and overall scorer. And at number 10, I would put Texas Tech. Texas Tech team that's coming in with JT Toppin and a lot of experience coming back from last year with a probably preseason first team All-American and JT Toppin, first or second team. He's a top 10 player at minimum in the country. And this was one of the teams that made an Elite Eight run last year, bringing back coaching staff and bringing back a lot of these pieces. And overall, I just feel really confident about their defensive identity, their physicality, and just being able to score and being an experienced team coming back from last year. And one of the teams I had falling, but in my head, I would probably have them in that 11 spot, is Duke. I'm not the hugest fan of the Boozer twins, of Cam Boozer. I'll be interested to see how he plays against elite level athletes as a number one option. I don't know how good he will be as a guy that you have to score and play through, as a guy that in high school was an elite level rebounder and really was just able to dominate with his size most of the time as a 6'9", 250-pound power forward. That, and they're also just trying to recover a lot, filling it with a lot of freshmen, but having a couple returning pieces that we'll really just have to see about their progression. And that's just really important for me. And also having a really important international transfer in Damien Sarr, the 6'9", 6'8" freshman from France, who's just a really athletic wing, but we'll see how his physical abilities in international play translate and how fast he translates. I know he's one of the top international players, but it's important to take that kind of into perspective when you're putting expectations on a Duke team that's relying on some unknowns is one of the big reasons I have them a little bit lower. And that's all from the Quest Number 9 podcast. My name is Seth Warner. And if you like this content, please like and subscribe. And you can find me at Quest Number 9 on Instagram and Twitter. And stay tuned. And I'll see you next time.